to support his engagements. We've now roped in Dr. Thelela Ngcetane-Vika, international law, security studies and global governance expert from the Wits University School of Governance, to just help us unpack this crucial meeting. Dr. Ngcetane-Vika, thank you so much for your time and good afternoon to you. So in a few hours' time, essentially ahead of that two presidents meeting, in the context of the well-established transactional nature that the Trump administration prefers, what will South Africa's strategy look like, do you think, on the trade front, despite, of course, the shaky diplomatic grounds it finds itself in currently?
Yes, I mean, good afternoon to you and your viewers. Well, there are two things that President Ramaphosa would have to focus on. Before you talk about a trade deal of whatever kind, first and foremost, they need to open or at least research the bilateral relations that have been really challenged the past couple of weeks. So that's the first thing, President Ramaphosa. It's the conciliatory tone that you need to posture there, the willingness to talk, the willingness to explain, especially matters on the African refugee crisis and also perhaps the matter on the Gaza question. And then, as you're saying, that President Trump is a transactional leader, so of course, trade deals will come to the fore.
And we know that we're not expecting, of course, any major deals to be signed. In fact, earlier on, just hearing from the acting president, Minister Gwede Mantashe, saying that, the South African delegation currently in the US is unlikely to sign any mineral-related agreements before consulting with stakeholders back home. But there is widespread speculation in terms of, what South Africa is willing to trade, with the United States, be it on the country's rare minerals, or there's also talk and media reports of possible deals with Elon Musk's Starlink aimed at mending relations with US President Trump. How much of what we are hearing speak to the tough balancing act that President Cyril Ramaphosa and his team will have to do tomorrow?
I mean, it's very, very serious because he needs to walk a very thin line so that he is not seen to be making concessions that would be problematic, especially trade deals that could look like a sweetness to those who are influential, especially in the President Trump administration. But equally, he's not going to walk to that meeting barehanded without anything to offer. There has to be things to offer, and I'm sure there is one or two trade deals that are on the making that President Ramaphosa and his team must be really wanting to present before President Trump. So definitely that one, there is no doubt about it. President Trump is transactional. What is it in for America? America first principle. So he can't just walk in and it's a talking and then it ends there. So President Ramaphosa must be aware of that. He's definitely aware of it.
And I mean, let's talk then about the team that will be flanking President Cyril Ramaphosa in that meeting tomorrow. Of course, we understand there are other conversations that are happening ahead of that meeting. Of course, Park Stow, the minister, being very central in those talks. But there's also a lot of talk in terms of who is in his team, speaking also about Minister John Steenhuisen and his role, also given just the geopolitical tensions, particularly on the narrative of this white genocide happening in South Africa that is quite false.
Well, the composition of the team is also strategic. Bringing your Steenhuisen, apart from the fact that he's the Minister of Agriculture, but also you are talking to that narrative, or at least trying in some way to counter it by bringing some white men who are in your cabinet, in this case, Steenhuisen. So it must have been a very strategic, thoughtful composition by Ramaphosa. And we mustn't forget, Ramaphosa was sort of a keen student of how President Mandela navigated these kind of complex diplomatic relationships. And in the case of South South Africa the process of transition from the apartheid to the democratic South Africa, which required sometimes really strategic and tactical decisions. So taking Steenhuisen, we are already talking to the white, group, if you like.
Do you think, South Africa will then be investing a lot of energy on these particular utterances that have been made, most importantly by President Trump himself? Or are they going to, go straight into the heart of the matter, which is resetting those relations?
But part of resetting the relationship is talking about those conversations. And I would imagine that one of the key things that President Ramaphosa would be doing tomorrow is to try to explain this narrative of the Afrikaner genocide, allegedly, in South Africa. He's got a responsibility to do so, and he can't miss this opportunity. It's one of the things that he needs to talk to. So I would imagine they will spend some time on it, maybe trying to explain to President Trump that what we are hearing from other quarters is not what's happening on the ground, what's the reality, and back that with evidence and statistics. So the resetting of the bilateral relationship will also depend on those things. It will also depend on how the conversations between themselves. One of the things we will need to look at tomorrow is the optics. President Trump loves optics. How is the body language between the two of them, the rapport? Sometimes those things would look like they don't matter, but they matter. And we'll be looking whether they are finding each other in terms of body language and maybe some jokes here and there about him coming to South Africa to play golf during the G20. And hopefully he gets to be convinced to come and attend physically the G20, which is in its own historic to be on African soil for the first time.
Dr. Ngcetane-Vika, I'm not sure where that other background sound is coming from, but I just want to ask this last question. You mentioned the G20. Of course, it is of concern that the US has not been participating at a level one would have hoped this year, given that this is South Africa's G20 presidency. But what are your expectations then come November in terms of the G20 meeting? We have indications from Trump himself saying that he will not be in attendance.
Yes, if tomorrow is successful, and what do I mean successful? At a basic level, the door is open for these two heads of state to have continuous conversations, and tomorrow there are some agreements that they reach. There could be a possibility that President Trump may be persuaded to attend physically the G20. But all hinges on tomorrow, how tomorrow works. If they're not finding each other, well, it may be a pipe dream, or at the very least, he will join via a virtual platform. But let's see how tomorrow works.
South Africa looking very confident there. But thank you so much for your time, Dr. Thelela Ngcetane-Vika. She is an international law, security studies and global governance expert from Wits University School of Governance. Of course,